As KAZU said, I was a trial lawyer for 22 years. I left the practice of law, although I'm still an active member of the California State Bar, because I found that litigation was a really poor way to resolve human conflict. And as I will tell you that as a trial lawyer, I had a lot of experience both with psychic violence in the courtroom, and I also trained in the martial arts. I'm a second-degree black belt, so I have first-hand experience with physical violence as well. I left the practice of law after obtaining my master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies from President Pacific University, which is a private Mennonite university, so I was basically trained in peace by the Mennonites. And it was through that process that I began to realize that there are very complex issues involved in conflict, and there are very complex issues involved in peace. So what are some of the opportunities for peace now that we recognize what some of the barriers are? Well, I'll outline them very quickly and then go and look at them more specifically. Interest-based negotiation, contact processes, constructive communication, recognizing that different stages of conflict have different needs. This is a critical point. Changing the culture of violence. This is probably the most difficult one we will face as a world. And so interest-based negotiation basically is a process of sharing perspectives. What did the life look like before the conflict erupted? What does the conflict look like now? What would life look like if the conflict no longer existed? The second is we seek out what are people's interests, what do they need to have satisfied in order for the conflict to go away. After we've gone through these processes, we look at a collaborative problem-solving process, engaging people in their own self-interest. For example, in the process that I do, I say there will be no concessions. If you make a concession, you are losing. Do not make a concession. And people are shocked to hear that. How can I get what I want without making a concession? It's very easy. Just focus on what your interests are and help the other people satisfy their interests. Conflict is as much a disease, it's as much a health problem as the avian flu, because it's neuropsychologically based, as hopefully I'm trying to illustrate here. And we should be attempting to intervene in conflict early on, not wait interested in its positive peace. And so what we have to do to develop positive peace is the post-conflict work of reconstruction, reconciliation, and creation of new meaning. And this is where art comes in. Whether it be art of photography or painting or dramatic art such as drama or music or writing poetry, literature, metaphor, it's the ability to express the past experience of conflict and new experience of peace with the right brain that allows people to understand and give meaning to their life. You will find that there is far more press given to violence than there is to peace. There's almost nothing given to peace. We live in a culture of violence. Not only here in the United States, but in the world. But one thing we have to do is change the culture of violence. We have to change from revering war heroes like Alexander the Great and Ulysses and these people of literature who were violent conquerors. And we have to start looking at people who were a little bit more peaceful, like Gandhi and Jesus, and even Martin Luther King, and even Tolstoy, a great advocate of peace. And start raising those people into the consciousness of our culture, our world. And obviously we have to promote peace. So those are basically the things that we need to do to change the culture of violence. Interest-based negotiation, contact processes, constructive communication, different stages, different needs, and change the culture of violence. We are using 17th century statecraft in a 21st century environment. It is absolutely obsolete. The idea of international diplomacy is being practiced today essentially the same way it was practiced in the 17th century. Very little change. It's not working. It never has worked. It worked in the times when there were national boundaries and we had a couple of 20 nations at most of controlling the whole deal, but we don't have that anymore. And so the idea that statecraft as a means of peace, it may be a means of economic development, I don't think so. It may be a means of maintaining political power, but if we're talking about peace, statecraft has demonstrated itself to be a complete failure, in my opinion. Not complete, but a substantial failure. The Kissinger idea of realpolitik is also obsolete. And the reason for that is what follows, and that is that the idea of territory, boundary, or nation is rapidly becoming obsolete. With the advent of the internet, With the advent of satellite communications technology, the ability of people to communicate around the world instantaneously, the dissemination of information, both positive and negative, the concept that we can control ideas, which is what this world is all about, through national boundaries, no longer makes sense. The fact that we have cheap arms that can be distributed around the world, the fact that terrorists can operate out of one part of the world, I will say this about terrorists: one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, so it's all perspective. The fact that one person can be based in one part of the world and blow something else up somewhere else without regard to national boundary tells us that national boundaries do not provide for national security. We need to finally understand that peace will not be dependent upon force, which is the current mindset of the world, but it must be dependent on ideas. And until we start getting that idea fundamentally into people's heads, we're going to continue to have a cycle of violence rather than a cycle of peace.
I have ideas which come to me like this. I enjoy my life tremendously, and I have been formed to be what I am because I was born in Belgium, which was challenged by Germany, and we were transferred to Alsace-Lorraine on the border, right on the border, and there I was to hate the Germans on the other side. But they spoke the same language. They had names like Muller, like Schneider, my mother. Why should we hate these people? We had the same people. And the only thing I could really look with respect was the stars and the clouds. So I decided to become a follower of the stars, of the planet, and of the universal beings. And I considered, my parents found this a little strange, that I walked in the street and I looked at the sky, and I looked on the other side of the hills, and I thought that life was divine. Life was something incredible. That life was fantastic. And how can they play in downgrading the miracle of life into all these stupid hatreds and wars and militaries which they have? So that from the beginning, in my own education, in one of the poorest streets of the town, where my father was a hat maker, and where when the guys came back with their money from the faïencerie, they spent the money in the pub and they were beating their women. I said, how is that possible? I just couldn't understand this type of life. My father wanted me to be a hat maker. I escaped from the Germans. They put me in prison because I refused to go to the German army. When I was released, I crossed the border to work with de Gaulle. De Gaulle, at the end of the whole thing, says, Muller, you attached the South territory to France. I said, you must be crazy. I wrote a whole thesis in which I say that this is impossible. Your thesis, we have burned it. And that was my end with de Gaulle. And Robert Schuman then one day became Minister of Foreign Affairs. And then he told me when he came to New York when I was at the UN, and he visited the UN to speak there, I asked him, how did you do this? Change the whole politics, not only in Alsace-Lorraine, but of the entire France and the entire Europe. He said, well, it's because there is a champagne dealer who had a view of creating a united world. And he wrote it down with two Belgian experts, put it on my desk, and he said, Monsieur Schuman, it is your obligation to fill this out. And I didn't know what to do. I barely understood it. I didn't read it to the end. But then I remembered that when I was a kid, I had promised to myself that if I ever could destroy the damn barriers between Belgium, France, and Germany, so that I could not even get my bicycle in every direction, that I would suppress them. And when this came back to me, I went to the office, I signed it. And it became the European plan, which took about 40 years, became economic, became political, a wonderful story. And when he died, he had just suppressed all the borders of Europe, and nobody protested. Incredible. All the borders in Europe were just forgotten, finished. I went to his tomb to report it to him, and I decided to make him a saint. He always, in his letters and in his speeches, he said, to reach peace is not all. One has to add to peace cooperation and love. Have you any politician heard ever speak about love? To love the Germans, why not? And now we have people who marry from Germany to France to all these countries. And you have not only the 16 European countries, but you have 10 more countries who have been admitted. So that my whole life since then, up to almost being 83, I have always new ideas. The former speaker ended up by saying we need ideas. And there were famous people who said that there is no work, nothing you decide to do which can succumb to the superiority of an idea. So that what I would suggest to you is believe that you can do it. That your life is something very precious, something very deep, and that you want to do something which might be helpful. It might be in your profession, or it might be for you by being a teacher and so on. But look at the sun in the morning and thank the sun to be alive, and have ideas. Leonardo da Vinci had a belt where he wrote his ideas every day. Now a book has just published on the ideas of Leonardo da Vinci. But anything he could encounter, he had always an idea. I think it is ideas that can save the world. You should not say, it didn't work, therefore I'm going to give up. Absolutely not. You try something else. Never give up. So, by the way, the last thing I'm going to do is that one day a lady came to see me in Costa Rica and said, oh, Mr. Muller, the meeting we had on the Machu Picchu on the Sacred Mountain, the conference we had there, it was so wonderful, unforgettable. And the speech which you delivered, such a great speech and so on. And then I said to her, do you remember anything I said? She said no. So you didn't remember anything? I'm sorry to say, but no, I do not remember. Oh, she said, I remember your harmonica playing. And since then, nobody, even in the General Assembly or in any place on earth, will get to an end with me without the harmonica. Okay. So that you will forget what I said, but the harmonica you will not forget who we are. Questions, I will be very happy to answer them if my wife allows me.